Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Telgorithm webinar. Thank you for joining us today. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces. My name is Samantha Carrera. I am a Senior Marketing Manager here at Telgorithm, and I will be your moderator for today's session on A2P 10DLC disruptions. To lead today's discussion is our own CEO and co-founder, Aaron Alter. Aaron will be joined, or rejoined, I should say, by Stefan Heller of the Campaign Registry. Stefan is the Vice President of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships at TCR and was one of our very first webinar guests back in 2022. So it's really exciting for us to have him back. We are excited to revisit some of the conversation that we had back then because a lot has changed over the last year. Some of the topics that we're going to be looking at today include a glance at the 10DLC ecosystem from a bird's eye view. If you joined our recent webinar, we actually sat down with Cineverse to talk about this from the perspective of a direct connect aggregator. So today we'll be doing the same, but from the perspective of TCR. We really want to address what TCR is responsible for and is not responsible for. We think that clarification will help a lot of people. We're also going to be, of course, diving into some of the top disruptions and solutions in the 10DLC ecosystem. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about Sole Proprietor 2.0. If your company services the sole proprietor use case, this will be interesting for you. There have been some new requirements over the last year that we wanted to touch on with Stefan. So without further ado, I would love to bring our guests to the screen. We have Aaron and Stefan. Welcome, guys.
Thanks so much, Samantha. And before we get started here with this another exciting webinar, first I want to thank you, Samantha, for all that you do to put these together and get these in order. It's not always that easy. Getting it all down, getting it all in order, and bringing this content to the broader industry, which is super impactful and important. And so want to say thank you for that up front here. That said, I'll just briefly intro myself because I assume most of the audience here has probably seen some of our prior recordings. In case you haven't, I'm Aaron, co-founder and CEO here at Telgorithm. We are essentially a texting cloud communication API today, no different than a typical API provider, except in the sense that we specialize in this acronym known as 10DLC, or Local Number Business to Consumer Text Messaging. And I am very proud to re-host today the Vice President of the Campaign Registry, which I will let Stefan himself explain what the Campaign Registry is to make that clear to the audience, and super excited for a second update and conversation today with my good friend Stefan. That being said, Stefan, please feel free to intro yourself to the broader audience here.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. So yes, Stefan Heller. I am the Vice President of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships. It does fit on a business card, that title. I've checked. Smaller font, but it works. And I've been working at TCR, which is the acronym we have for it, obviously. I've been working at TCR for probably nearly 5 years now. And it's, in essence, what is TCR? TCR is a centralized location, so where people can register the brands and their campaigns that are associated with those brands for messaging into the 10DLC ecosystem. So we register information about the brand, validate and verify that brand. And then we gather information for the campaigns, and that registered information then goes to DCAs or to connectivity partners and ultimately DCAs, who will then verify and check things for compliance. So the information that people are putting in for that campaign information is very important, because the DCAs will be utilizing that information to really check that things meet compliance. And that is one of the things they do. But ultimately, it is just about everybody's responsibility in the chain to check for compliance. So it's not just, oh, we'll let the DCAs do it. Everybody has a responsibility to really check for compliance, because it's everything that we should be concerned about, and making sure that nobody's exploited a loophole in a platform to suddenly bring bad messaging in. And you've seen those things, Aaron. You know that we all seen it happen, and so we all want to make sure that we invite the right people to the party. We make sure that there's, the bouncers on the door are checking checking those invites, checking that you really do have the invite and you're not bringing moonshine in. You've got some something decent, a good glass of wine, a good bottle of wine. But it's really just making sure that we are registering and communicating that information up and down the chain so that people can make decisions appropriately on that, because TCR is not in the messaging path. We are a register. We are not in the messaging path. People sometimes get confused and think that we sit there, doing things in the messaging path. We don't. And it's really important to recognize what we do and what we don't do, because that will take away from some of the confusion of where we sit and what we're responsible for. People say, "Oh, our registration hasn't been approved. It is not finalized," and we've been told it's TCR. It's like, not really. It's not really us. Our validation and verification, on average, it takes about 2 minutes. So it really should go through super quick. And then it's about other people who have a responsibility to double check and triple check things to make sure that the information is going to, in the end, result in great messaging, wanted messaging, and then checking what is happening in market, right? Because again, TCR is not in the messaging path. We don't see what's happening in market. We can only say, on this day, at this time, this brand, so that they are going to do this kind of message and this kind of messaging campaign to consumers. And
meaning you guys are like a repository. And by the way, thanks for, there's so much to double click on over there. And thanks for sharing all of that, Stefan. But just to double click on that, because that is a lot of confusion within the broader industry. Many folks think, oh, the TCR didn't approve my campaign. And so I think, which is what you were just alluding to here, is, more of at a high level, where does TCR or the campaign registry actually sit in this ecosystem? On the TCR website, you're listed as the reputation authority, but more in layman's terms, it's the way that I see it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is you're kind of the bind that puts it all together. So you're not necessarily approving anything, but you're more the bind. So you have the relationship with the network operators, with the various DCAs that are in the ecosystems, the CNPs or the CNPs, again, all these acronyms we'll get into, and then even net number, which is the registrar, to kind of bind it all together, but also to set a baseline for compliance, which, by the way, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I always say that compliance is the entryway ticket to get into A2P 10DLC. Many people are confused many times that they think that since A2P 10DLC has rolled out, there's so many new compliance rules. And actually, the reality is, for the most part, while that's true, many of them actually always existed on the person-to-person path. They just were not enforced. And now that the network operators are rolling out business-to-consumer messaging, aka A2P messaging, you want to keep a clean ecosystem, number one, and number two, allow for higher throughputs for the various different use cases for these businesses. And in order for that to happen, there needs to be a gatekeeper or set of gatekeepers, if you will, to ensure this is going to be a clean path to keep it that way, rather than have everything migrate over that's festered over the years on person to person into this. So the way that I see it, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, is you're more the bind, meaning TCR is more the bind of binding this entire new ecosystem together. Now, there are various aspects of a brand and a campaign, brand being an entity that there is an initial approval that takes place. My understanding is there is something from an approval standpoint that takes place on the TCR side, not the DCA side. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then we'll get into the campaigns. Also, feel free to correct me if anything I just said, it sounds off to you.
Yeah, I'm going to correct you, Aaron.
That's why we're here.
So the messaging guidelines had been applied extensively in the shortcode space. And with the original long code traffic being unsanctioned traffic that was running over the networks, into the networks, because they didn't know who it was. There was no understanding of who was doing what. It was a little bit like the Wild West. So the registration process to understand who it was just it's simply what you do. If you were deciding to invite people to your house, you would just check who they were. do I know this person? Is this person a friend of somebody? Well, are they vouching for them? It's these checks. And when we talk about the messaging guidelines, the CTIA have these published on their website. People can go to the CTI website and they can download these guidelines, and they're very, very clear. It's pretty damn clear. Now, if there is a bit of a gray area, then that's where you have people like yourselves to talk to, DCAs to talk to, wherever your connection path is. But you talk to folks about, well, this is what I do, and I don't know if this is like a square peg in a round hole. Please help me understand what I have to do. And there's loads of people that want to be able to help you do it, to help get your messaging across and understand how the guidelines can be applied, or how those messaging practices are there to protect the consumer. They're there to help to ensure that the consumer is not being abused, really. So this is why people talk about opt-ins, because we want to send messaging to people that have said, please send me messaging, not to people that, because we've all been on the receiving end of messaging where like, how did somebody get my number? What is this? And no, stop. And you want that stop to mean something. You want that no, or that, whatever you're saying in response, you want it to have an effect. So the compliance element is really a critical part of it. And while it does create an element of friction, because you have to understand what it is you want to do, you can't just go, oh, I've got this really cool idea and I want to send these messages to these folks, and that sounds a fantastic idea. It's going to be brilliant, and people are going to really want what I'm going to be offering. And I'm just going to go out and buy a list from somebody because I've heard I can go and buy a list. It's like, don't do that. Really don't do that. It's grow your customer base, understand who it is, know that you've got opt-ins to receive those messages, market to those folks, sell to those folks by all means, but understand how to do it. And with TCR, one of the things and how we sort of sit in this is, you're right, Aaron, we are gathering information. We are making sure that we're pulling all of these pieces of information together, and we're then passing it up the chain so that the next person can go, okay, who is this? Oh, they're doing this. That's who they are, the brand. This is what they say they're going to do. Okay, they say, oh, they've got a website. Are there T's and C's on that website? Are there things that I need to check off, and then be able to pass it to the next person in the chain, if there is somebody else in the chain, to be able to do their checks and balances. And it could be, everyone is human to a degree, and somebody might miss something and go, oh, we went into that and wait, there was this thing missing. Or in their T's and C's, they talk about sharing data, but they say it's all data. They don't have, maybe they haven't carved out the mobile part and said, yeah, you can share data on the email side, but not on any sort of activity that might be where you'd be gaining information around from a mobile number. So there's lots of things that being able to understand how to check, what it means is really critically important. So I think as people go forwards and they start to register everything, where TCR sits is in this communication path. We do have some validation in when we're looking at field validation. Does an email look correctly formed? Does an address that someone puts in, does it actually go to a legitimate place, not to a car park in the middle of nowhere, right? And I've seen those, that we there have been people that put addresses where it's a car park in the middle of nowhere, and you're like, really?
Yeah.
So you want to have some basic validation checks, field entry data checks. And then we work with the DCAs and the CSPs to make sure that we're gathering the right kind of data. And one of the things you talked about in the brand vetting, when somebody is registering a brand, the checks and balances we do there, we do with a third party. And that third party who is experienced in checking brand identity, and we call it the identity check. So these identity checks are done very quickly. They're done based on specific pieces of information. Sometimes it's done on specific pieces of information that people are not used to getting, or it was done back in the dawn of time. Telgorithm is a perfect example, Aaron. I mean, as a co-founder, you may well remember the documentation, the things you had to fill in to send to the IRS to get your EIN. And but could you lay your hands on that document like right now? It might take you a bit of time to sort of find it and go, oh, it's somewhere. We have it. But
got to dig it up, and
right. And some people will start off a trading name. They'll say, my company is going to be Stefan's Awesome Messaging Company, and then decide, actually, no, that name really sucks. We need to change it to something a little bit more, something that people are going to really use. But the name registered is that, and then the DBA is something else. And so being able to understand the information that you submitted and then how to submit that information all adds up to being able to get an effective, very quick validation and approval within TCR. I always say to companies that CSPs that are working with multiple different brands, as part of your KYC, as part of what you're doing when you're onboarding those brands, just ask for that IRS form. It can easily be obtained. It should easily be able to be obtained. Sometimes if a company's very long in the tooth or it's gone through a number of different changes, you need it because you're like, wait, you're known as that, and then you were known as this, and then you changed your name to that. But the EIN has changed all the way through. You just need to be able to, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to check an authoritative source, or our third party does, and they need to get back and they need to look at it and find it so they can just validate and go, yes, this is that brand. There's maybe 4 other brands that have a similar spelling, but this one we've cross-referenced through multiple databases, and that EIN and that address, wait, it all points to this one brand. And so that's where that validation identity check comes in.
So just to ask on that, are the 3 points that are being looked for, and thanks for all this, because this is really helpful, it's the legal name that's on file with the government entity, matching the tax or the EIN number of that entity, and the address. It's those 3 pieces that must match.
Exactly, the legal address, which isn't necessarily the address that you're sitting at working from, or the WeWork office the companies provide you. No, it's not that. It might be an address in, Delaware.
Right.
So
and sometimes people update things, in these entities. And so we've seen, it doesn't happen often, but sometimes a customer will not get verified right away. Like you said, it is very quick if you have the right information. And for the most part, you guys have automated that with your external partner, which is amazing. But sometimes they get delayed. And normally in these instances, something may be off. It doesn't mean that somebody did something nefarious or did something off. But like you said, maybe something was updated somewhere. Like you said, maybe they put in their work address versus the one that's legally there. In those situations, what we've done, and correct me if I'm wrong, if this is the right process, we just simply have our customer open a ticket directly with you guys. You guys then look it up, or you guys ask to attach the actual form and can then help, expedite that along to bring it to a resolve. We've seen that from time to time. You guys have been really helpful for that, if that is the right path for that.
It is, because at the end of the day, if we're dealing directly with the CSP as having an issue with their registration, it makes it faster if they contact us directly. Yes, absolutely. And some of the key things to remember about the IRS database, for example, it's, this is our dollars at work kind of thing. And like, when we look at the amount of the database sometimes can have issues. It will sometimes not be available. And when it's not available, it means that we build up a queue. So people will sometimes get people get used to certain kinds of process time, right? They'll go, oh, it's easy. Look, you put this into TCR and 2 minutes later, boom, you're verified. And then there's that Monday morning, you do it and it's pending. You're like, wait, what's going on? So you're like, what should I do? What you should do is wait. Send a support ticket in, and we do actually have an access point where we show if the IRS database has dropped off or if it's down for 15 minutes, 30 minutes. And so
interesting.
The CSPs should have that access point, and they should be able to go in and see if that is the reason why things are pending. Because the worst thing you can do is try and do it 3 or 4 times, because then what happens is that you might be dinged 3 or 4 times for costs.
Totally, right.
It's an automated system, right? The automation doesn't always know that they normally would catch it if it's exactly the same entry again and again and again. But sometimes if it comes through and it is not caught immediately, then you might have 2 or 3 costs of, you know, requesting a validation on the brand. So I would recommend everybody look at it and they really just understand we're in a pending state. Send a quick ticket over to, you know, support@campaignregistry.com and ask them, hey, I'm just trying to file something. I'm in pending. Is there anything that I should know about that it would affect this coming through right now? And you might get a response like, there's a massive queue. Don't worry, we're seeing this dissipate. It should be done it might take hours. The worst we had is when somebody maybe inadvertently sent thousands of requests because they were testing some of their systems. They didn't realize they were hitting us. And it built up a queue, which all of a sudden people on that day were like, I can't get anything approved for 24 hours, which when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, 24 hours is not horrible. But in this day and age where people get instant gratification, 2 minutes is the norm.
That's a long time, by the way, because
if you've suddenly gone to an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, it's still not happening, and I've had my lunch. You start to think, what is wrong? What is happening? Maybe if I just need to, you know, punch enter like 20 times, that will make it happen faster. No,
totally.
don't do that.
You know, in this day and age, we talk about text per minute or per second, and people are like jumping at the bit to get them out. So even 2 minutes or half a minute can be a deal. I think it's more about the way we look at it is setting the right expectation for the end user, which in our case is the CSP, so they could set it for their brands. Just to button up over here, because you mentioned something here. So you can get a delay on a brand approval if you didn't enter right information, but there could also be a delay because, you know, this Monday, there was just a lot coming in at once, and therefore there is a backup. And if I heard you correctly, there is a way which our customers, our CSPs, via the TCR APIs, to be able to see if this delay is because of a queue backup versus it might be something related to inaccuracy of information. Is that correct?
So operations have a endpoint which you can. There is an endpoint that you can go to, and you can see if there's a delay on the actual database,
awesome.
the IRS database. The other thing, Aaron, is that if a company is very new, they also might not appear in the database. That's another problem. So very often, if somebody's 3 to 6 months old, the database itself has not been updated. So even though they say, look, we are a real company, honest, we're 6 months old, we're 6 months new, they may not appear. And so sometimes also they're not being able to find them can be frustrating because they'll say, but we are real, look, here's the form. So, which is why we initiated the appeals
I see.
element within here, because you can appeal if you're not found, and in the appeal you can upload documentation, and you upload that document. You can actually upload the IRS form, and that IRS form that, you know, has validated and given you that your EIN means that you can then confirm that. There is a cost to the appeal. It's just because it's a manual process, and that again, it's not a TCR process; it's an outside of TCR. But it does mean that you can upload the actual documentation, and there is a way of actually getting the approval now done in a much faster way.
Awesome. Those are all amazing things to hear about as far as updates here. And I think those are really, really beneficial to everyone in general. So just to button up a final thing here. So brand approvals is, we'll say, handled via TCR and its partners. However, campaign approvals, these are the use cases that sit under these brands and ultimately have phone numbers associated with them, which is also not done in TCR. The brands are essentially what kind of TCR has control over or manages. Anything beyond that, if I get a rejection on a campaign or my campaign is not getting approved, it's really delayed, these are not things that are on TCR side that are causing those delays. Those are further upstream, either through a CNP, a connectivity partner like Telgorithm, or even further upstream, which is the DCA. Is that correct?
Correct.
The reason I say this is because there's a number of different statuses within TCR, and many times end users get confused. They don't read all the documentation, right? There is active, right, which shows active. There's registered, and then there's DCA elected. 3 different things. So many times people say, oh, this is active. Oh, I thought everything's approved. It's all registered. Or they see it shows under each individual network operator registered. the way that I put it, again, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a pre-approval is the way I put it, meaning we're going to approve this based on the information you entered here and based on criteria that network operators who you're partnering with gave TCR, but it's pending that full review by DCA to ultimately get it fully approved and registered, which the network operator put the onus on DCA for that final approval. Are those all things correct?
Um, it's correct, but not the verbiage I would use. I wouldn't use the word approval with TCR. We are not approving anything. Which is why we have it as registered. So the information is registered in, and now somebody else is going to take that information and check and review it and approve it. So the DCA election, the DCA is approving, or yourselves as a CNP approving, is part of the checks that you're doing on the actual messaging campaign. And at the end of the day, the DCAs they're kind of the last stake in the ground. They have the last say in it before it goes to the carriers. And then if the carriers have some issues with it, or there's consumer concerns and consumer responses that are negative to the messaging, then obviously carriers will refer back to their DCAs and ask what is happening, and that's where other things could happen to
Is
that.
that post-approval? So in other words, because my understanding is DCA is the one that literally goes into, we won't say any names, but in the various databases with the different registrars and network operators, and hits approved or registered, and then it becomes registered. But then if the network operator sees an issue post that period, like for the traffic or some other thing, is where they can go back and say, hey, either we're going to suspend this or something needs to be fixed and put it back. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So, I mean,
Awesome.
and that's really about, traffic in market, because again, unfortunately, there are people that just can lie, and they will say, I'm going to do standard OTP traffic. And then maybe they start doing that, or maybe they don't, or it could go on for 6 months of OTP traffic, and then suddenly it changes and it suddenly becomes payday loans or something that everybody suddenly is up in arms about. So it's the in-traffic experience, the in-market experience with the traffic is 100% outside of TCR. The one thing within TCR is that people can go in and say, we are and the DCA can do this, an MNO can do this, but the DCAs can go in and look at the traffic and go, nope, this has changed. We're suspending this traffic. And so there is a DCA suspension, and they can put a reason in there. And that information then filters down through your customers, and you can then, you have the reasons why something was actually stopped or suspended.
Thanks so much, Stefan. Just a quick plug to our webinar that we did last month. We actually hosted Cineverse, which is one of the major DCAs in North America, and asked this particular question. If I'm not mistaken, they called it drift content. And essentially the idea here, like is what you're describing, is somebody that registers campaign with samples that say they're going to do X, and then it does Y, and how they actually manage and look for that, and could lead to disruptions and suspensions if done in a nefarious way. We actually had more conversation of how conversational messages work and how to set up those campaigns there. So I would encourage everyone here, it was very insightful in general, to check that webinar out if you haven't already. That said, let's slide over a little bit here to this diagram here. So this is what we've been able to kind of decipher as best as we can of what occurs within the ecosystem behind the scenes. I know there's probably some lines we've skipped out here. Just an open-ended question for you here, Stefan. Is this an accurate depiction of kind of the ecosystem here in general? And what comments, if any, or things would you like to point out here that may be of note that our audience might be interested in?
Right. So
we are putting you on the spot here. So
right. I'm just looking at the arrows and the way they flow, and it's kind of,
there should be arrows from DCA directly to the MNOs, which we missed, right? And
right.
that's missing there. But aside from that, for overall, does this represent, for the most part, the ecosystem?
So I would say, from my perspective, the messaging starts with the brand who wants to send some messaging to its customers. From the brand, it then goes to a CSP, campaign service provider, because they normally a brand
right.
will utilize as campaign service provider, right? And this might be either this brand might be a direct customer with Telgorithm, but I think the where Telgorithm sits in the ecosystem is that you work with CSPs, you work with platforms that need to work with you with the tools that you have to be able to be more effective in the space. So the CSPs that are contracted with the brand will then work with, let's say they sign up to TCR. So a brand goes to a CSP comes to TCR. TCR then will register the CSP's brands, where there will be vetting, and the campaigns where there is potential for external vetting. And external vetting only applies to two carriers, AT&T and T-Mobile, in terms of the other things that you could get if you did external vetting, to look at the vetting score that you get.
Which is different than the regular DCA vetting,
Yes.
meaning just to get your campaign approved.
Yes.
Many times people confuse it. Oh, I did this external vetting and I was approved and I got risk score X, which led to X. I'm done, right? No, your campaign is not DCA elected by the network operators. I don't want to point that out because many people confuse that.
Right. So brand to campaign service provider to TCR. And then what can happen, it goes brand campaign service provider, Telgorithm TCR, where Telgorithm is a step in that process before the DCA. So yes, you're right in terms of the diagram where you've got an arrow from Telgorithm to a DCA, absolutely right. And the campaign service provider to Telgorithm. And with TCR, we actually have an arrow coming to us from the CSP, creating the brand and the campaigns with the vetting associated that Telgorithm will then view and look at and do whatever necessary approvals they have to then pass on to the DCA, waiting for them to do any of their checks to then respond back to Telgorithm, responding back to the CSP and updating for all of them in TCR the status with the DCA. So it's kind of right.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm glad that we weren't too far off, but where we want to get to is if we could shift over to the next slide, because I think this is kind of where we wanted to go with this, is campaign service provider versus reseller. And I know there are these entities, but we wanted to call out certain specific things and get further clarity on this because, and it'll lead to somewhere, you'll see where we're going with this on why it does ultimately matter. But I want to kind of just open the floor just to begin with this particular subject on how would you describe the difference between a reseller and a campaign service provider, just organically in regards to TCR, just high level?
A reseller is a CSP that is utilizing another CSP or a DCA to have their data entered into TCR. So the reseller, or potentially a reseller of a reseller, may have the direct association and contractual relationship with a brand. The brand does not have the direct relationship with the CSP or the DCA in this case. It has a relationship with the reseller or reseller of a reseller. So therefore, in TCR, when, say, a DCA or a CSP is entering that brand's information, they have an association also to create, which is a reseller association. And this identifies the company that actually will have the relationship from a contractual perspective with that brand. So, so let's just say Telgorithm, people came to you directly outside of TCR, right? So they're not a CSP signed up to TCR. There's somebody that approaches Telgorithm and they go, hey, we want to use you and all of your wonderful bells and whistles to onboard all of our customers. And you say, great, okay, well, you'll need to give us all of the information because we need to enter it into TCR. So one of the things you'd do is that you would enter their brand, their campaign information as they had given it to you. And then in the campaign registration, you would enter the reseller information. So you would say, oh, and the company that's associated with this brand and campaign is XYZ CSP, whoever it is. And so that's how we look at resellers, at least in TCR. Does that help, Aaron?
It does. And one of the things I'll even add here, because sometimes people get very confused by this, and I'm going to have you explain CSP in converse to that in a second, is if a brand is coming, or even an ISV, as some providers dub them, or independent software vendors, that really should be a CSP, meaning a CSP is listed as a entity that has a platform that supports multiple brands. But assuming they didn't go to TCR, so the way that you know that you're a CSP versus a reseller, if you're giving your customers your brands as a software provider, your customers' EIN numbers, tax IDs, and addresses, like we spoke about before, to your connectivity partner, then you are a reseller in this setup. But if you are going to campaignregistry.com, hitting register, registering as a CSP, and then taking your brand's information, giving those tax IDs, the legal name, and the address into the campaign registry, then you are a campaign service provider.
Correct.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, Aaron. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, what is a DSC, a DCA? A DCA is a very well connected, very well informed CSP. They're large and they have a lot of contracts, but they're just a very well informed, very well connected with good contracts directly with the carriers, because that's why they are a direct connect aggregator. But essentially, everyone in the ecosystem is a CSP, and they just have different titles because of how they sit in it and how they use, to your point, how a CSP using another CSP to enter their data is in effect reselling, is a reseller within TCR's hierarchy.
Right, exactly. If we could slide over to the next slide, because I want to continue on this subject, because there's an important point I want to get to here. And that is, so let's just start very basic here. Assuming we actually don't, but there are many vendors that do support the reseller model. Again, just to clarify here, this means that you are a software provider providing texting services to brands. The brands give you their tax IDs, legal information, and then let's just assume it was Telgorithm. Telgorithm has the CSP account with TCR, takes that information, puts it into TCR, and then there's a place in TCR where you write reseller. But there's no such thing, at least that I know of, called a reseller ID. Like a brand has an ID, a CSP has an ID, even all these entities have IDs, except a reseller, from what I know, just has a name and I think an email address or some contact information. The point I'm getting to here is...
It does have an ID. There is a reseller ID. There is. Yeah.
Okay, I was not aware of that. But the point I'm getting to here is, let's assume I had 10 brands as an ISV that I gave to my connectivity partner, who is also functioning as my CSP. And then I decide, for whatever reason, I no longer want to use this connectivity partner, whatever the reason might be. I now want to use this connectivity partner. What it means is those brands have nothing to do with me as a reseller. They are tied to the CSP, which is also my CNP. Hence, I would have to recreate a net new brand with this new provider, either again as a reseller or going directly to TCR, again, to redo that same campaign, which there is a cost involvement to doing that. Also a process. You might have to call a bunch of APIs, regather this information again to do that. If you originally registered as a reseller versus from the very beginning, as an ISV, I went directly to the campaign registry. I registered all my brands. They belong to me. And then we'll get to in a second the campaigns part. But in that scenario, even today, those brands belong to me. The vettings, the external vettings they've done belong to me. And I could switch to whatever partner I want, and the brands remain with me, because brands aren't allocated to as a CSP to a connectivity partner. But if you are in the reseller model, and you're giving your CNP to operate as your CSP. If you ever wanted to, switch providers, it could put you potentially into a bind in doing that. Additionally,
Yeah.
I'll even add to that, right? If let's just assume, and we'll put Telgorithm as an example, I want to do the reseller model. I give the tax ID, all my brand information to Telgorithm. I don't know status on anything other than what Telgorithm tells me. Oh, so why is my campaign delayed? What's the status? Oh, I don't know. We're still working on it. It was rejected for X reason. I have to literally have a black box once I submit it over the fence as a reseller to that partner because I have no visibility. Versus if I'm a CSP of my own, within TCR, I could see, was this sent upstream? I could see the DCA IDs, which I could see. I could see the CNP IDs. I could see the event timestamp areas, both in the API and the portal. I could see when it's DCA approved. And then it gives me more visibility and timing to hit up my connectivity partner. Not necessarily they've done anything nefarious. Maybe they dropped a ball on something. Maybe they had a bug and didn't get the campaign. I know what's going on versus many times you hear as a reseller, I just send it over the fence to my CSP, who's really my CNP, who's my CSP, and we don't even know what happens. And so from the way our understanding of things and the way we've experienced things along with our customers is if you are a platform provider of multiple brands, the ideal path is to register directly with TCR so that you get the ownership of the brands, you get more visibility into the status of your campaigns, you own the brands, you own the vettings, so it gives you that functionality and fluidity to manage that if you wanted to multi-thread or switch providers. And best of all, you get a relationship directly with the campaign registry. So this is my take on it. I wanted to hear the TCR's take if this line of thinking is correct.
That's a lot of thinking, Aaron.
Indeed it is, but it's important, as mentioned, because there's cost and a lot of ramifications to that, which
Absolutely.
is why we're bringing it up.
So, yes, in a nutshell, the simple answer to you is yes. What you've explained and how you've explained it is accurate. Obviously, the one thing we want to try and do at TCR is we need to make sure that we're not in the way, that we're stepping out of the way for people to do whatever commercial deals they want to do with whichever entities. And that goes for whether you're a CSP or whether you're a reseller. So we are bringing out migration tools, and these points on here is migrating CNPs, but that campaign migration tool, as it says there, it's going to be a self-serve tool. But it's definitely aimed initially because, like any migration tool, you can't cover all the eventualities. You need to just aim for the ones that will work very effectively for your existing base of people that are using your systems today, and then start working out from there. So yes, this is going to be applying to the CSPs, CNPs who want to be able to move to another CNP. So this is, somebody within TCR who's got 100,000, 10,000 campaigns, and they want to say, you know what, we go through X partner today, we want to go through Telgorithm tomorrow. There would be a process. There will be a very much a self-serve process that will enable people to move these campaigns with little to no cost. I mean, that's the element in it.
And forgetting the cost, also the approval process of having to get a campaign fully through the process and DCA approved all over again, which can take time.
Right. The one critical thing in this is that if a brand is probably over a year old, they may need to do that identity check again on the brand.
The brand level.
Yeah, the brand level. Now, so it's one thing to just be aware of. We're just looking at that and it's not often the case. A lot of people usually will migrate within a particular time frame, but some of the, and also any external vets that may have been done, the external vets are definitely only valid for a year. So it's, if you're looking at moving those campaigns and those campaigns that have had, or the brand has had external vetting that runs those campaigns, then there may need to be a revet done. But overall, and we're looking at all of these parameters, which is why I say, these things are currently, we'll put out a phase 1 and then we'll sort of start hitting phase 2. And one of the things we're looking at is what about resellers? Because
so that's where I was going.
That have resellers. So if we were able to create a process that also had that happen, that would be great. But part of the problem is that right now, the reseller information is being applied by a lot of people, but it's not mandatory.
Right.
So this
That's
is
what, yes.
something which it causes problems because people don't necessarily always put in the information. If they don't put the information in, we could put the most amazing reseller migration tool together. And if the information isn't in there, it's going to do nothing. So we're reviewing and looking at what it does actually mean. What do we have to do to make sure that somebody is putting something in there if there is something to put in there? And
Right.
so that's under review literally right now, because it's a critical part of what we believe the ecosystem is, because otherwise there's a lot of manual work.
Yes, and cost as well,
A lot of
involved,
manual
which is
work,
what
a
we're
lot of
getting at
cost.
here.
Exactly. And I'm not, this is the one thing I'm not doing. I'm not saying, hey, if you're a reseller, you'd be better off as a CSP and come up and sign a TCR. I'm not saying that at all. We want you to be comfortable with whichever way you are looking to terminate your messaging into the whole messaging ecosystem. And some people have long-standing relationships as resellers with their partners. And we are not, again, we don't want to get in the way. We don't want to sort of say, you must do this or you must do that. We want to be able to say, wherever you sit, we're going to give you a set of tools that enable you to effectively communicate who you are and what you're doing, and that you want to move to somebody else. If you want to come and register at TCR, sure, okay, we can do that too. But we don't want to sort of push people into one corner or another. We want to give people the choice to do what they do today and just have tools to be able to manage their commercial decisions about where they are effectively going to move their traffic to. And we just provide a tool to help them do it.
Got it. But just to be clear, this tool, as the one that's being launched now, if you are a reseller, does not help you in any way, shape, or form as of now. And as you mentioned, because of the way the ecosystem is currently set up, resellers, whether the information is put in or not, makes it very, very complex. And even if there was some sort of way to do this, it might be a while before that is out there. And so I know from TCR perspective, your job is not to get in the way and to offer the most optionality, but from a Telgorithm provider perspective, we believe that the current state of the ecosystem today, it's best if you are a provider of multiple brands to go directly to TCR for the reasons that I just mentioned. Again, obviously, TCR side wants to give this flexibility across the board because there's many different scenarios that can exist. But for the most part, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, it would behoove, right, for the visibility, for the ownership of the brands today, for now the flexibility of being able to migrate brands without having to go through a whole process potentially all over again, along with owning your brands themselves. From all of those perspectives, if that is your scenario, then you're better off going directly to TCR as a CSP in the current state today.
Right. I mean, there are benefits from signing up directly. You do have control over when the data is entered, over the accuracy of the data, the feedback loop that and the information about that data, and seeing all of the steps that it's going through. You're not relying on somebody else to deliver that information to you. But on the other hand, there are people that very effectively deliver all of that information, very, very timely. So again, you got to look at where you are, what are you doing, what your own control elements are like, whether you want to have control over each of those elements and each of those steps, or whether you're totally happy, or you might have, a handful of people running the company and running that, and you basically are utilizing somebody else's platform to give you all of the bells and whistles that you need. And if that's the case, and you're gradually building up your messaging platform, then maybe you don't want to leap into doing this all yourself, because it starts to become a massive administration, and you're not quite at the point where you want to hire another person to just do that or just to work with that. Or maybe you do.
But even if you're a reseller, you still have to hit up the same APIs that are essentially resurfaced by your provider. Because at the end of the day, you still got to get the tax ID, you still got to get the campaigns, you still got to do the dirty work. Might as just own it, is what I'm trying to get at.
And yeah, I mean, there is, Stefan's personal opinion, and then there's, in terms of what's happening, from just across the whole ecosystem, it's, if somebody wants to do something in a different way, my job is to figure out how we can give them the tools to continue doing it the way they want to do it. So
Totally.
yes, I mean, so I totally understand, and I've seen people do both. People say, they have an opportunity to sign up to TCR, and they choose not to because they have a specific working relationship with their CNP, or with their DCA, and they like the fact that they don't have to worry about that administrative overhead, and that's somebody else's problem. They just got to provide the details. Yes, they've got to provide the details anyway, but I think it's definitely the migration tools that we're bringing out are going to help, number one, help TCR step out of the way and help people make commercial decisions and quick decisions, because we're not throwing people into a whole lot of extra admin. It's like, you do this, you move your stuff, have a nice day.
Right. And just to button up on this final point here, I 100% agree with you. And again, I get the take of the TCR and providing multiple options. Where it gets tricky, and I'm not asking for a comment on this because I know it's going to be difficult to do that, but many providers today, many connectivity partners only offer the reseller model and don't even tell ISVs about the CSP model, and you have to literally beg and beg and beg for them to open this up. I agree with you. You should give multiple tools that a business should be able to properly choose. But many providers, for some odd reason, and many only until recently, at the beginning, only supported resellers, didn't support CSPs at all, no one even knew what it was, let alone have the option there. And even today, many are still very kind of iffy and pushing towards the other direction. So I know I'm not expecting you to comment on that, but I did want to point that out from a provider perspective. And a lot of what Telgorithm does is try to provide transparency to the audiences where, want to make people aware that there are both of these options. Sure, you could use reseller, but you should also partner with a partner that also will support you as a CSP if you feel that's the best option for you. That's it. I want to move on to, because I know we're running on time here, onto rate limiting. Again, not to get into any specific carriers here, but just to drive home a certain point here, just to check for validation from your end here. So obviously, the different network operators come in different colors. We won't mention any specific ones today, but some network operators, when you get a campaign approved, for instance, give you throughputs at a brand level, no matter how many campaigns you have under this brand. Other network operators do it at a campaign level. So each given campaign, depending on the campaign type, there could be a low volume campaign, there could be a dedicated campaign, there could be variations. We spoke today about external vetting. And so some network operators do it at a campaign level. Other network operators do it at a phone number level, regardless of the campaign. This is the amount of throughput we're giving you on numbers. And one of the points I want to bring out here is we talk about this thing called A2P, or application to person or business to consumer communication, versus P2P, or the latter, the legacy, old, like you call it, the old Wild West, a person to person. And one of the main benefits and differences in going through an added vetting, or even in the cost of a campaign between a low volume campaign and a high campaign, the difference in what you're paying for is throughput. And so therefore, somebody somewhere in the ecosystem would need to be able to manage the throughputs that you are literally paying lots of money to have potentially. Again, especially if you're doing external vetting, you might even do a special business review, because the one network operator goes up to 200K daily on a brand, and I want above that. And there's a way to go about that through a special business review, which has a lot of cost. But my point I'm bringing out here is, regardless of what it is, if you hit that throughput limit, and this can be done, certain network operators at a campaign level, the very next message will drop on the floor. You will be charged for that message, including a carrier pass-through fee, not to mention the disruption for your brand that may not even be aware of that did all of the, like we discussed today. I took the time to register my brand, got all the legal ID, the EINs, I got my samples, I got my privacy policy on my website, I got my opt-in, I got my opt-out, my content is beautiful and clear. All of a sudden, boom, 2 days in, all of a sudden I'm getting drop messages. Imagine the realization of that after you spend all this time, cost, and money, all of a sudden, boom, I'm now getting dropped messages on the floor, and I don't understand why. And so what I wanted to check with you on here, just for a check here, is somebody somewhere in the ecosystem would need to be managing to make sure you don't exceed this limit prior to you sending the message. Because once you send the message, you could already exceed this limit, hence you're going to get an error and you have a disruption. Are the things I'm mentioning here accurate? And do you have any comments on that?
I mean, I think that the being able to offer people tools that manage their traffic so that they are having the best customer experience and consumer experience that they can is very important, because you want to ensure that people are not receiving messages at 2 a.m. in the morning, for example, because they're not going to be read and they could be thought of as harassment in some ways.
Right.
So absolutely, I think being able to, you've done, as you said, you've opted in, you've got all these people, you've got a beautiful messaging campaign, you're going to an opted-in list. So people are waiting for your messaging. And the worst thing that can happen is if the messaging ends up being delayed or being delivered at the wrong time, or it, like you say, it looks like it's going to hit a potential daily cap or a throughput, and you don't want those messages dropped on the floor, because then you have to go back and retry. And so, I mean, practically, it's awesome to have that kind of product. I mean, TCR has, we're not in the messaging flow. We have nothing like that. But I think Telgorithm has something, don't you guys?
I don't know, Samantha, slide over. Let's see if we have something here just to talk about this real quick. So to a lot of the things you mentioned here. So number one is protection to make sure that, when you're sending messages, you're proactive protection, making sure you never exceed your limit. So this is, I'm going to say here, a quick plug for Telgorithm here, but we've developed, which is now patent pending, because we foresaw a lot of the way this ecosystem is built that many have not. And so the way Telgorithm works is because of our partnership with TCR, when our CSPs, who are our customers, share campaigns with us, TCR directly informs us via API of such campaigns. We know the pre-approvals based on each network operator. We load that information automatically into Telgorithm's database at a brand campaign level. So when you associate numbers in Telgorithm, we know exactly the throughputs. And what Telgorithm has built, and we do this on the fly, is you want to send a message to X carrier and say this carrier has a daily limit. Well, we know that when that carrier resets its timer, we actually proactively do a lookup into the OSR net number, which we showed on the prior slide, to check in real time who is the carrier of the end user, including subsidiary, right? Many of these carriers have many subsidiaries that are very famous, and that is included in these limits. And we track out and monitor. And if you're at 50% of your limit, we send you an alert to saying you're 50% in this brand or campaign, 75%. If you reach 100%, we actually queue the message for you so it doesn't drop and fall on the floor. And then when that timer resets, we automatically send it for you. But to your point, and you just mentioned, that's not good enough, because, let's just say one of these network operators timer resets at 1 a.m. in your time. I don't want to send a message at 1 a.m. and there's even legal issues potentially with that. Well, what we've built in is time routing. You could literally tell Telgorithm, for this specific campaign or these sets of numbers, this brand, even though the timer has reset, wait till 9 a.m. to send it. Or it's not even posted, it's additional feature. Besides message prioritization for unblocking the queue, which are the most urgent, we also now have something called message expiry, where you could literally tell Telgorithm, if for whatever reason, when I send this message out, I hit a limit, and for whatever reason, it cannot be sent by this time, just expire the message altogether. We don't need to send it. It doesn't make sense to send it anymore. The doctor's appointment has passed. It doesn't matter anymore, and we don't even charge for that expiry either. So I just wanted to point out these features, which are, I believe, very helpful and have helped our customers.
Aaron, how do you deal with just the differing time zones with the US? How do you deal with that?
So in the case of the network operators, there's one network operator. Again, we're going to avoid names today of network operators.
No. Wait, so sorry. I'm going to rephrase that question.
Yeah, sure.
Aaron, how do you deal with the differing time zones in the US from your customer's perspective? If they're sending to, they've got they've got customers in different time zones. So if they said, I want to send it at 7:30, between 7 and 10 p.m., only. But of course, 7 to 10 p.m., you've got 3 different time zones to play with. How do you deal with that?
I wish we had a slide here for a screen share. We have that ability. So you could set, in Telgorithm, we have this thing called a message configuration file where you put all your webhooks and they are one-to-one with campaigns. In that message configuration file is where you set your time routes. And in that time route area, you literally choose the time zone for the time you're choosing for on hours.
Okay.
We have every time zone that you could think of, from UTC to Eastern time. You could choose that right out there. Great question. That was something that we have in place now to address that.
Cool.
Yeah, good question there. That said, this I think buttons things up over here. Is there anything, we don't get you often as we'd like to have you, and I know you're super busy these days, but is there anything you would like folks to know about what's maybe coming out, something we didn't touch out today, or just in general about what's been happening at the TCR that the broader industry should be aware of? I always like to end with that, with any partners that we talk with, just to, maybe I've missed something, or what you want to convey to the broader audience of late about TCR and anything going on in the ecosystem that you could share.
Sure. So within TCR, obviously, we did a massive cleanup on sole proprietor from sole prop.
I didn't even get to that today, so stay tuned.
I know we've kind of, and I recognize that we're on vapor at the moment in terms of the time. So with sole proprietor, we went from sole prop 1 to sole prop 2, and we put some other checks and balances in place for sole prop 2. And there was some abuse in sole prop 1 where people that had EINs were registering as sole proprietors, and that's not what sole proprietor is about. Sole proprietor is about those unique set of requirements that you have where you are a business operating still under probably your own social. You might have an events business that you run at the weekends, or you might actually be a business that you've only ever been a sole proprietor, and you may one day go and get an EIN and have the things that you need to do around having an EIN business. But as a sole proprietor, you have utilized 9 times out of 10 your own tax ID to run this business under. And that's where we needed to make sure we were cleaning it up, making sure that the people that really were in that space were the people that deserve to be in that space.
Yes.
And there are requirements around it as well. And there are very specific requirements in terms of the information that you have to submit to us on a monthly basis, with showing the volumes that you're doing, which shouldn't be over a certain amount. There are limits within that, because as a sole proprietor, we're not expecting as a sole proprietor somebody to send hundreds of thousands of messages. If a sole proprietor is sending hundreds of thousands of messages, really they should have gotten and set up their company as an EIN, because
exactly, appropriately,
they're bringing in a fair amount of money, that they're establishing themselves as a business. So it really is for a unique set of the ecosystem of people that are sole proprietors, and they might never go beyond sending 100 messages, 500 messages a month cross carrier.
Right.
So it's a small amount of messages. They've got a small dedicated business, and they might be a side hustle. It might be building into something else. But like everything starts small and then builds up to be something larger. And if it does become larger, there's obvious paths to go there. So sole proprietor changed. There was a lot of cleanup, a lot of work to be done, a lot of work working with.
So you're saying there's no such thing as a starter brand?
Right,
and so my point here is, and thanks for bringing this up, and I know we're on borderline overtime, so really appreciate you bringing this up, because this is an important point. But what you're getting at here is, and I just want to clarify, is there was a period of time last year and the prior year where some providers, whatever the reason is, didn't give the right guidance to their true brands and said, oh, you don't want to get your tax IDs, or no one's saying that's not difficult or not. Well, we found this way, if you're sending a very minimal amount of messages, even if you're truly registered as a right entity and not a sole proprietor with the government entity, come here, use this thing called starter brands and get going here. And unfortunately, people look to their provider to trust them as this new ecosystem rolls out. Didn't know that. I'm like, why would I get tax IDs if I don't need to do that? Many of my customers don't send that much throughputs, or I don't even care. I'm just going to max it out and I'll deal with it then. Hence, the wind got caught, the ecosystem caught wind of this and said, wait, this is not appropriate. Essentially, there was this thing we talk about, sole proprietor 2.0. Well, there was why is there a 2.0? There should have always just been sole proprietor 1.0. And that led to what I think you're describing here, which is a sunset of that because of the misuse and then the reappropriation of a new version of it for the proper and true sole proprietors, which now requires a set of reporting. It requires a connectivity partner that is partnered with a DCA that allows for this reporting to be able to approve the upstream. Not all providers support that. Again, another plug for Telgorithm. We have been on top of this, and we do support that for true sole proprietors. We even provide logging information in our logs that lets you know which carrier and how many segments it was in our given logs. You could easily run that report. And by the way, I'll even ask you, that report needs to be given directly from the CSP that activated the sole proprietor, which they also need to get approval for from TCR directly to even enable sole proprietor on their account as well. Separate subject we won't get into today, which is PFTs or platform free trials. We'll leave that one up. But just to clarify here, and thanks for bringing it up, are all the things I mentioned correct here?
Yeah, I mean, there's an addendum that the CSP has to sign to actually activate it, and there's some checks and balances that are done on our side as well before things are actually done, because we need to know that people can actually operate and can operate correctly as a sole proprietor with all of the reporting that they need to do. So we actually need to be shown that they can do this. Now, if part of working with Telgorithm means that those tools are available, then that definitely helps. But we would be going to the CSP going, how are you going to gather this information? How are you going to do the reporting to show us your system functioning and working? So that's, all of these are really important, because this isn't just we're going to believe what somebody says. We actually have to see it working.
And one of the things I always tell folks in the industry, Campaign Registry has a website. You guys are updating it, and I see you guys are even putting posts now on social media, which is great, and providing more transparency into the ecosystem. And I always say, look, don't necessarily trust Telgorithm, and this is part of the reason why we host you in DCAs. The fact is, you have a website, go to TCR's website, look there, look what it says there, and look at this detail, versus so you at least have a checks and balance system for whatever your provider is. I'm not saying things are nefarious, but maybe they're not fully up to speed on what's going on. Maybe they haven't really looked into it and spent much time on messaging because they're focused on some other product. Whatever the reason might be, you should always be going to Campaign Registry, even if you don't want to be a CSP, or even if you're just a brand and just want to see what's going on for a quick fact check to see this information.
There's a lot of information there, and there's a knowledge base that is there, and that was updated very recently over the Christmas period last year. So we did a massive set of updates to really just bring everything up to date, so that there was hopefully no misinformation in there, or odd information or old information in there.
If there is, we'll let you know.
Yeah, please. So I think the only other thing I'd want to mention is that, we often, people sort of say, oh, the requirements change a lot. In effect, they don't really change that much. And to your point, really early on, Aaron, as you said, the requirements for actually compliance and messaging compliance have been around for a while.
Right.
They're not really different. So the same compliance and the same guidelines apply to both toll-free and shortcode, and then also 10DLC. So you don't have to say, oh, what applies to this and what applies to that, and does it change? It's the same. You're sending a message using a message sender of some description to get a message to an end user that is a consumer on a carrier's network. So there are a set of basic, simple guidelines that you need to sort of follow to be able to ensure that you're sending good messages. And it's just so that you are protected as a business, and you're not allowing bad actors into your platform, and so that this is what these checks and balances are for. And also, obviously, to ultimately protect the consumer, because that's who we're always looking to protect.
And ultimately, and by the way, as far as simplicity goes, this is why it's good to have a good partner in the ecosystem. Again, another plug for Telgorithm that is close with TCR and DCAs to kind of talk through whether it's something that's just basic or something that's a gray area, right? Not everything, you might go look at CTIA and see X, Y, and Z, and something might not be clear on there. but you can then, there's gray area use cases. An example I'll give is, one of our customers is in the mortgage industry. Obviously, there's been known to be, nefarious activity there. So it's not like cannabis, which is shaft, and that's never allowed, but mortgages, you might need to tweak a little bit, or if you're a legitimate mortgage business or you support legitimate brands that are mortgages, you're going to need a provider that is close with DCA, that knows how to give you the right guidance proactively on what to set, on how to properly go about being in and messaging within that mortgage industry, versus in general, things can be complicated, or you may not know the guidelines are clear, and you could run into potential issues. And so what takes the complexity and makes it simple, and one of the things we strive to do at Telgorithm, is making ourselves get into the complexity so we could kind of dumb it down for the customer, CSP, or the end user, to make it easy for them, not to get around the fact, but to make it easy for the legitimate businesses that are simply trying to get their messages across to the end users that want to receive those messages.
And part of the information that's required, and that's why kind of the fields that sometimes we add, and people go, oh my God, TCR's changed the fields we need to do. They've added these other things in now. Yes, and the reason for that is normally not because we're sitting there going, can we make it really awkward and difficult for people? No, it's because we've been speaking to people in the ecosystem, and they say to us, please, can you add these fields? Because it makes our job easier to be able to validate and verify that campaign is doing something that meets the compliance and the messaging guidelines. So these additional fields are not TCR saying we're going to put them in there. This is the ecosystem. It's the DCAs, the CSPs that go, oh, hell yeah, if you put that piece of information and those fields in there, our checks would be so much more straightforward. But when you have a template that you can work towards in a submission of information, it means the checks can be therefore much more, it'll run much more efficiently. And so you're not having to look at 10 different emails to gather the information. You got a registration point within TCR that says this campaign does these things. This is the call to action. Here are all the various bits that they said they're going to be doing. This is, and the information you gather is information that any person would ask a business if they said to them, I would like to use your messaging platform. And you go, great, that's fantastic. What are you doing? Well, we're doing this. What else? Okay, we need this information, this information, this information, this information. All we're doing is putting into a form, into a data collection point, all of the questions that somebody would normally ask so that they can make a considered and responsible decision based on the information given. So when we add fields, we are adding fields because it's enhancing and hopefully streamlining the process, so you don't, as a brand, get 5 other emails after you think you've finished registering. So are we adding some extra fields in? Yes, we are. That will be coming probably some point in Q2, but it's going to, like I say, be relevant and enhance the information so that people can make fast decisions and hopefully have the brand up and running and messaging their customers faster rather than slower.
Awesome. By the way, one last thing, and again, I know we're super overtime, but just to go back, because you touched on a point here, CSP versus reseller. So Telgorithm today only supports CSPs for some of the reasons that I mentioned here.
Right.
One of the advantages that Telgorithm has in doing that is when a customer comes to us off the street, they have to be a CSP. This means, and we didn't talk about it today, the process of becoming a CSP, which you guys now have a session you guys give, and there's a whole process for that. That lets Telgorithm know, hey, as a CSP, they were already validated by the registry. So even just getting to access Telgorithm, we already know that the TCR itself already validated you to some level, versus reseller. If we supported that, we might know who your brand is, but you overall as a CSP, we may not know until later on by some brands that you put in, or maybe you're sneaking into good brands now, because I don't know how you are as a CSP itself. And again, another benefit to Telgorithm in working with you and working with all exclusive CSPs, that pre-vetting has helped us. And it matters not only for us, for our customers to keep a clean platform and hence clean relationship with the upstream DCAs. I just wanted to point that out as a side
No,
note.
it's a very good point. And really with the CSP registration, TCR does an enhanced vetting on CSPs. So this is a much long, very manual, very in-depth report that is delivered to us that really, it goes through everything about that CSP that we could hope to find out about. Now, if they're a very new company, there's not going to be much. But the very fact that they're a very new company and maybe have 2 or 3 board members, or maybe even only a handful of employees, sometimes the fact that there's very little information doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, but they can get a low score, vetting score, because there isn't much information. So we pass all of this information on to the people they say they're going to be connecting to. So in terms of, if someone says we're going to be connecting to Telgorithm, we pass that information on and we'll say to you, hey, this company got a low score. It's not necessarily indicative of them being bad, but you may want to just keep an eye on them. And the same is true as if we find that somebody has had a messaging violation of some kind and it's stemmed back like 10 years ago. Now, it may be that for the last 10 years, they learned from that one thing that happened and they've done everything amazingly well today. But it could be that, again, we'll say to you, hey, this company got a low score because of these things that dinged their overall score. You need to do your own set of due diligence and KYC to understand whether this is a company that you do or you don't want to work for. We're not saying they're bad. We're just saying this is the information we find. Again, what TCR does is collect data, collect information, pass it into the chain for people to actually make decisions so that they can have a good messaging experience with customers, with brands, with CSPs, and hopefully work on keeping the bad actors out of the ecosystem.
Awesome. Look, we could keep you all day, you know that, Stefan, and I wish we could, but we got to wrap things for today. Unfortunately, again, super thankful for you giving us your presence a second timer. And again, hopefully we could have you back again in the near future sometime here.
I think maybe, especially when we're doing some of the things that we're launching out into the ecosystem, that might be a good time to chat about some of the things, because it will definitely affect your customers, and maybe getting in front of that might be a nice idea.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the audience attending, or whoever is watching, whenever you're watching. We greatly appreciate that. Feel free to always message in whatever our different channels are to comment any questions at any time. Whether you want to use Telgorithm service or not, we're here to spread the word in the right way and give the right information. And thank you, Samantha, for setting this all up again. Unless there's anything else, I wish everyone an enjoyable rest of their day.
Thank you guys so much.
Samantha, thank you so much. You've been awesome as always. I really appreciate all of your hard work.
We love having you, Stefan. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.